I started teaching, and the very first, so I was terrified because I'd never taught before, but it was a new course, so it was only first years, and I thought I must know more than a first year. Actually, there were some first years I think they were up to speed with me at the time. But I did have some experience, and I remember standing in front of the first years and saying, you know, it's really important that you have a project that you're interested in doing for yourselves, and I can't tell you what that is, but something that's got to get you out of bed in the morning with a spring in your step, if you like. Something you're passionate about. And I realised while I was saying this that I wasn't actually doing that myself. You know, I'd only spent the last 3 years working for other people. And
I like when you're talking, I like the fact that Kodak is basically sort of making that little noise in the background.
Yes. What about me?
Kodak being your dog
I know.
and basically joining us today. I love that. I think it's really sweet. Oh, come on, Kodak.
Oh, sweetheart. You're going to stay there. Stay there. Get in your basket. In your basket. This will be edited out. So I realised that I wasn't, you know, I felt like I had to lead by some kind of example. And so I went back home and took out of a drawer a tea towel that I'd bought from a Royal National Lifeboat Institute shop in Great Yarmouth, which was a map of the sea areas in the Shipping Forecast programme, radio show. And I'd bought it about 3 years before, sort of pretty gobsmacked by this idea that these locations that meant, you know, were so deep within my imagination, my psyche, if you like, and so many other people's, that they were really real geographical locations. Of course they were. You know, if you think about it, of course, sea area Dogger is somewhere, but I never really thought about it. And so I got this tea towel out and I looked at it and I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll go to all of those 31 sea areas and I'll see if what I find there, the reality of what I find, is anything like the imaginary landscapes that had built up in my head since childhood, really.
Yeah.
Because the programme, the Shipping Forecast had always been on in my life, you know. We always listened to the home service, which is what it used to be, and then it moved to Radio 4, so it was always on in the background. And so like a lot of people, it didn't, you know, it wasn't something even though I was interested in sailing, it was only dinghy sailing, so the language of the Shipping Forecast didn't mean anything to me.
It's very poetic.
It's very poetic. What's fascinating about it is that it's in English, but it doesn't make any sense. It always reminds me of Eric Morecambe, who said, you know, I'm playing all the right notes while holding Andre Previn by the lapels. I mean, I'm playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. You know, and it's like that idea of it's esoteric. It's sort of tricky. And you can only understand it if you need to understand it. And because of that, the language is very beautiful.
Of course, yeah.
And so I set off, you know, locally, first of all, trying to work out a kind of language that I wanted to use in the work. And so Tony Ray Jones is a big influence. Martin Parr work was an influence. Chris Killip, you know, I was aware of.
I mean, it's interesting. Can I stop you there? Because I looked at the book again. I didn't open the book for quite a long time, since you came to Guernsey in 2012. And looking through all your books in doing this research for this interview, I mean, you can see now the difference, the evolution of Mark Pauэр in terms of photography. And when I looked back at the photo, when I opened the book, it was like going back to meet a friend that we know for a very long time. But I've noticed something, and again, I'm not sure whether it's relevant, so forgive me if it's not.
I'll try and answer this in the affirmative. Go on.
But there's your approach of photography was very much closer in terms of portraits, for example, than any other book that you've done. And there's a lot of children as well in your photo, which is interesting because my memory of the Shipping Forecast as a book, when I first opened it, was when you think about it, you think that it's a landscape, and there's a lot of landscape, but there's also a very much Mark Pauэр meeting people, getting close to people, which is quite unusual for your work when you compare with what you've done and what you're doing now.
Yeah.
So were you aware of that, or were you trying to apply a specific style again? Or
That's a long question.
Sorry.
Well, first of all, I wasn't meeting people. There's only one picture in the book where I actually spoke to anyone. So from that point of view, very little has changed because...
you're still a shy person.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing to say, but it's the same thing applies to me today. If I can get through a whole day without speaking to anyone while I'm working, it's been a good day. I'm not a photographer because I like to engage with people. I'm not, yes, there are more people in the pictures. Because that was the kind of thing I liked at the time, those kind of pictures of weather. But it was also a handheld camera. I think that's very important to understand. It was a Mamiya 6. It was very fluid. I could work very fast. And also I was interested in the idea of the forecast as listened to by other people like myself. I wasn't interested in photographing the forecast from the point of view of fishermen or sailors. So children playing on the beach or parents or whatever, that was all very much a part of that sort of ordinariness. But also I think that, I say a lot's been written. It sounds like people have done PhD theses about this, but they haven't, it's best of my knowledge they haven't. But people have mentioned this lonely children, and asked if I was a lonely child, and I think, maybe that's something to do with it. But it is very autobiographical. And I think if there is a thread that goes through all of my work, I think it's about this imagined landscape, or imagination of a child about the world out there. Everything I've done has been about that, I think. Everything that I've done which has meant something to me has been about this idea of marrying this remembrance of things as I thought they were, and then the disappointment of finding them to be quite different.
Of course, yeah.
So I think, if ever I did have a retrospective, I think there would, there would be a theme that you could see through the work, even if stylistically it did change a lot after the shipping forecast, because while I was making the shipping forecast, particularly towards the end, I was looking at a lot of German and American large format work, and I was really quite bored of making this work with the square black and white. It was a decision I made to use that kind of language, if you like. But the square is a very difficult format to work with. I think there's certain tricks you can use, and then you end up repeating yourself over and over and over again because it's just there's not much width. There's a lot of sky and a lot of ground, and it's difficult. I felt I bled myself dry with that camera, and I had to leave it behind. And it was probably a stupid thing to do because it was a very successful book and a very successful project. It sold 10,000 copies, for goodness sake, which is unbelievable for a first book.
Amazing.
Because it got out of the photography ghetto of 500 to 700 copies you might be expected to sell, because it reached other people who were interested in other things without dumbing down. It's still a serious photo book. But I left it all behind and started working in a very different way.
There's a beautiful text also written by David Chandler
as
an introduction text. We talked about the British identity, so looking for British identity versus your own memory, so trying to find the British identity, but also to go through your memory as well. Do you think it still applies now? Because I feel like the same applies now in your work. There's an element of looking for British identity, and still sort of having a space for the fantasy, or not the fantasy, but the memory or the imagination of. We will talk about the American landscape, for example, which is very much linked to your childhood as well. Yes.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Everything goes back to that. I don't know if I was a particularly imaginative child, but I was quite, I don't want to bang on about being lonely, but I did spend a lot of time on my own thinking about things. And imagining another world out there. And I think it's not something that I'm not some kind of archaeologist who's trying to use this again and again and again. I think it just comes very naturally to me that, and I'm not, here I am sitting talking to you about myself, but I'm not trying to say that my work is about, all about me. My work is much more about the things that I encounter. But pinning the whole thing for me, inside is this idea of going back to the imagination. What is imagining a landscape, imagining a kind of place
Yeah.
that doesn't really exist at all.